At 6:41 on an October evening, Rowan Sutter came out of the trees at the lower ranger station with one trekking pole in his hand and another strapped across the back of his pack. The station had already closed for the day. Its windows were dark, except for the weak bulb above the permit drawer, and the last visitors had rolled out of the gravel lot half an hour earlier, leaving only tire dust, fallen beech leaves, and the smell of wet cedar bark cooling after a clear afternoon. Ranger Jolene Pratt was in the equipment shed, rinsing mud from a set of rescue helmets, when she heard somebody strike the side door with an open palm. Rowan did not look like a man staging anything. That was what Jolene would remember most clearly, and what she would repeat under oath years later. He looked torn apart in small, ordinary ways. His lips were gray from cold. There was blood in the shallow scrapes along his forearms. His right boot was unlaced. He had pine needles stuck in his hair, and when he tried to speak, the first sound was not a word, but a dry, broken pull of breath. "She was behind me," he said. "Lila was right behind me." Jolene brought him inside, sat him on the bench by the lost and found bin, and asked him to start from the trailhead. Rowan said he and Lila Merritt had begun at the North Glass parking area just after noon. They were both experienced hikers. That fact was never in dispute. Lila had made her living with maps and photographs, teaching field courses to teenagers in spring, and selling illustrated trail cards from a little workroom behind her mother's house. Rowan ran Stone Cup Guided Walks, a small outfitting business built around patient, beautiful routes through the state forest. They had hiked together dozens of times. They knew weather, distance, and the way dusk gathered first in the ravines. That was why his version sounded convincing. He said they had taken the Crow Glass Trail toward Lantern Ridge, turned down the fern cut, eaten sandwiches above the creek, and argued only once, lightly, about whether to turn back before the light dropped. Lila wanted one more photograph of a patch of moonwort fern she had been following for 3 seasons. Rowan said he waited while she stepped off the marked trail with her camera. She moved into the beach stand, still close enough that he could hear her jacket brush the leaves. He called her name after 3 minutes. She answered once, impatient, but calm. Then nothing. He searched until his voice was gone. He climbed the bank. He went down into the creek bed. He found one of her trekking poles leaning in the ferns, as if she had set it there to free her hand for the camera. He shouted again, and heard only crows leaving the upper ridge. He thought she might have slipped into one of the old charcoal pits hidden under leaf mold, or followed a deer track toward the wrong watershed, or been startled by the man they had seen earlier with a burlap sack and a digging tool. "The ginseng digger," Rowan told Jolene, looking at the station floor. "The one she complained about last month. Dax Renner. He was out there. I saw him near the second switchback." By 7:15, the first deputies from Larchmont County were driving toward the reserve. By 7:40, Rowan was wrapped in a wool blanket, standing under the map board with a pencil in his shaking hand, drawing the last place he had seen Lila. His lines were exact. He circled the fork above Eelbrook Creek, marked the moonwort patch, and drew a crooked X near a rotting birch. He kept apologizing for leaving the trail to get help. He kept asking whether dogs had arrived. He asked to go back out, even after Jolene told him he could barely stand. The first search carried the terrible energy of a mistake that might still be corrected. Volunteers came with headlamps. Firefighters fed ropes down the steep creek banks. A dog team worked the soaked leaf bed until midnight, and again at dawn. Lila's mother, Maris Merritt, stood beside the command tent in a navy cardigan buttoned wrong, holding a thermos nobody could make her drink from. Her son, Theo, kept moving between the maps and the parking lot, asking each returning searcher the same question before they had removed their packs. "Did you see anything blue?" Lila's rain shell was blue. So was the wool cap she wore on fall hikes. Blue was the color Maris looked for in the woods for the rest of that year. blue cloth in brush, blue plastic caught under a root, blue paint on survey stakes. Anything blue became a small, violent hope. For 3 days, the forest answered with almost nothing. A glove was found near the creek. Lila's second trekking pole was recovered at the base of a slope half a mile below the place Rowan had marked. There were boot prints in the damp mud, but dozens of searchers had already crossed the same ground. A torn strip of gray nylon snagged on a hawthorn branch matched the lining of Lila's pack. On the 4th day, a deputy found an old camp tucked under a shelf of sandstone, a coffee tin, a bedroll, and a burlap sack full of roots. Dax Renner had used it. That was enough to give the public a villain. Dax was a thin, suspicious man with a narrow jaw and the exhausted anger of somebody who had been accused all his life, sometimes rightly, and sometimes because he looked like the sort of person people wanted to accuse. He dug roots illegally, slept in the forest when his sister locked him out, and had been warned twice for confronting hikers who photographed his camps. Lila had reported him that summer after finding fresh cuts in a protected ginseng plot. Rowan told investigators that Dax had stared at Lila from the trees that afternoon, and Lila had muttered that she was tired of being afraid of men who thought public land belonged to them. Dax denied seeing her. He denied seeing Rowan. He had no good alibi, only a gas station clerk who thought he had come in after dark, and a sister who said he appeared at her trailer before 10, wet to the knees and in a mood. The timing helped no one. Deputies searched his camp, his truck, and the shed behind his sister's place. They found mud, root knives, liquor bottles, a woman's hair tie that turned out not to be Lila's, and a pair of cheap binoculars. They did not find Lila. Rowan stayed in town through the first week. He did not retreat when the reporters came. He stood beside Maris at the command tent and spoke in a low, controlled voice about Lila's knowledge of the woods, her stubbornness, the way she would ration water before admitting she was lost. He corrected reporters gently when they called her a tourist. He told them she was a mapmaker. He told them she had taught half the county to notice what grew at their feet. He looked ruined, but useful. In a crisis, usefulness can pass for innocence. After 10 days, the search narrowed. After 17, it became recovery. After 6 weeks, the official search ended. The woods did what woods do. Leaves fell. Rain flattened the boot prints. Ferns went brown and then returned. Winter hid the ravines. Spring filled them with green so thick the search maps looked like a fiction. Lila Merritt became a name on laminated posters at trail kiosks, a blue dot on the cold case board at the sheriff's office, a story repeated at outdoor stores by people who lowered their voices at the part where an experienced woman stepped away for a photograph and never came back. Rowan Sutter became the man who had tried to save her. That was not a title he asked for, but he did not refuse it. The following spring, he organized a safety talk called Walk Back Together. He brought Maris a box of printed maps showing all the searched zones. He told Theo which slopes were too unstable to revisit. On the first anniversary, he led 30 people to the edge of the Eelbrook ravine, stopping before the place where the trail narrowed. He said no one should go farther. He carried Lila's remaining trekking pole, the one he had taken to the ranger station, and he placed it against a beech tree while Maris wept into her gloves. To the county, that gesture meant grief. To Detective Anika Moore, it meant something she could not name yet. Annika had not been lead investigator when Lila vanished. She had been assigned to financial crimes then, sorting check forgeries and contractor disputes, while the forest search consumed every available deputy. By the time the case crossed her desk, 2 years had passed. Dax Renner had been questioned so many times he began answering before officers finished the questions, and Rowan's statement had hardened into official memory. Annika was careful with official memory. It had weight. It also had habits. She read the file in winter when the reserve was closed after an ice storm. The documents were clean but uneasy. Rowan's map was precise. Too precise, maybe, for a man in shock. His statement gave distances in tenths of miles and named trees by species. He remembered the place Lila left the trail, the way she turned, the angle of light on her shoulder. But when asked exactly where he had searched before going for help, he became less precise. Down toward the creek, up toward the ridge, around the hollow, back and forth, everywhere. There were other small things, none strong enough to move a warrant. Lila's camera had never been found. Rowan said she carried it when she stepped off trail. Her blue rain shell had never been found. Rowan said she was wearing it. Yet the glove near the creek was dry inside when recovered, though rain had fallen hard after midnight. The torn gray nylon on the hawthorn did not come from Lila's pack. Lab comparison had been inconclusive, and no one had pursued it because the search was drowning in more urgent facts. Dax Renner's camp was close enough to matter and far enough to explain nothing. Annika interviewed Rowan once, 18 months after the disappearance. He met her in his office above the outfitter shop, a room that smelled of rope, coffee, and printer ink. On the wall behind him hung a large map of the reserve, with Lila's searched zones shaded pale green. A photograph of Lila stood on the shelf. She was laughing at something outside the frame, one hand lifted to block sun from her eyes. Rowan saw Annika notice it. "Maris gave me that," he said. "Do you still talk to her?" "When she wants to. I don't push." He had a calmness Annika disliked and respected at the same time. Not coldness. Not exactly. It was the calmness of a man who had told the story often enough to lay it down without cutting himself. He answered every question. Yes, he and Lila had argued on the trail, but only about daylight. Yes, Lila had been upset about Dax. No, there had been nothing romantic between them. They had tried, years earlier, for less than a month, and both decided friendship was easier. Yes, he still blamed himself. "Why did you bring her pole out?" Annika asked. Rowan looked down at his hands. "I thought if I left it, we might lose the exact spot." That made sense. It made too much sense. The entire case was built from reasonable answers. For 5 years, the reasonable answers held. Maris stopped attending public searches after the 2nd anniversary. Her knees got worse. Her voice thinned. She kept Lila's workroom exactly as it had been, except for dusting the map table every Sunday. The tiny drawer still held pencils, pressed leaves, spare lens caps, and rolls of flagging tape. The calendar remained pinned to October, the day of the hike circled in green. On the top shelf sat 12 printed trail cards Lila had finished before she vanished, each with a watercolor plant and a careful warning about loose shale, sudden fog, or old pits hidden beneath leaves. Theo wanted to pack the room. He did not say it cruelly. He had a wife by then, and a baby who cried whenever Maris held him too tightly. Grief had become a room no one could use. "She's not in there," he told his mother. Maris answered, "No, but she left from there." Rowan visited less often in the 5th year. His business had grown. Stonecup guided walks became Stonecup Outdoor School. He was photographed for a regional magazine, leaning against a trail sign with a coil of rope over one shoulder. He spoke about risk and humility, about never underestimating familiar ground. In every interview, Lila appeared as his wound and his lesson. He did not use her name cheaply. That made people forgive him for using it at all. The forgotten photograph came from a house nobody connected to the case anymore. Edith Barlow had lived on Sawmill Lane for 42 years, in a white house with a sagging porch and bird feeders made from chipped teacups. She had been a postmaster, then a widow, then the sort of old woman who knew which families were fighting by how they addressed each other's holiday cards. She took pictures constantly, not because she was good at it, but because forgetting frightened her. Her kitchen drawers were full of envelopes from drugstore photo counters. Her freezer held batteries. Her hallway closet held 5 cameras, 3 broken flashes, and a shoebox labeled Birds, 2011 to maybe 2018. When Edith fell and moved into her niece Sylvie's spare room, the house had to be cleared. Sylvie did it slowly, one Saturday at a time, while her own children complained about dust and found treasures among the clutter. In a knitting basket under a faded quilt, Sylvie found a disposable camera wrapped in a grocery receipt, so old the ink had vanished. The camera had 4 exposures left. On the front, in Edith's careful block letters, was written, "Forest Gate, small deer, orange mushrooms." Sylvie almost threw it out. Then she imagined Edith asking what had been on it. She dropped it at Cal Rook's Photo and Print, a narrow shop between a barber and a tax preparer. Cal still processed film for art students, elderly customers, and people who found cameras in drawers. He developed the roll on a Tuesday morning while rain ran down the front window in clear lines. Most of the photographs were bad. A blur of a bird feeder, Edith's thumb, a tilted shot of mushrooms glowing orange at the base of a stump, 2 underexposed pictures of a small deer near the old warden's gate, its ears lifted, body half hidden by weeds. Then one frame made Cal stop with the sleeve held up to the light. The deer was gone from that picture. The gate was there, chained open. Beyond it, in the far right corner, 2 hikers stood on the old service road beneath the green tunnel of hemlocks. The woman was turned in profile, blue cap visible, one arm crossing her chest as if holding a camera strap. The man faced her with his back partly to the lens. He wore an amber pack cover and had a red cord looped from his belt. Between them, bright against the dull road, was a blue rain shell folded and strapped to the top of the man's pack. Cal knew the woman before he knew why. Everyone in Larchmont County knew the poster. Lila's photograph had hung in the window of his shop for 16 months. He called Sylvie first. Sylvie drove over, stood in the shop with wet hair sticking to her cheek, and stared at the print without touching it. Then she called the sheriff's office. Annika Moore saw the photograph at 3:20 that afternoon. It was small, grainy, and slightly crooked. The date printed in orange at the corner read 10/14/19, which meant nothing at first because disposable camera dates were often wrong. Edith had not labeled the year. The image showed no face clearly enough to convict anyone of anything. It did not show violence. It did not show Lila dead or afraid. It showed 2 hikers near a gate. But Anika felt the old file shift. The warden's gate was nowhere near Eelbrook Creek. It sat on the western boundary of the reserve, 2.5 miles from the place Rowan had marked as Lila's last known location. The road behind it had been closed for 7 years because the old sap boiler shelter beyond Bracken Draw had collapsed, and the state did not want hikers wandering into rotten structures. It was not part of the public loop. It was not on Rowan's drawn search path. It was, however, a road he knew well. Stonecup had permission to use it during guided maintenance events. Annika requested the original negative sleeve, the camera casing, and all of Edith's related photographs. She drove to Sawmill Lane with Ranger Jolene Pratt, who had aged visibly in the 5 years since she opened the ranger station door to Rowan's panic. Jolene stood at the warden's gate with the print in her hand, lining up the slant of the post, the broken hinge, the leaning hemlock behind it. "This is here," Jolene said. "Could it be another day?" "It could be any fall day if you only look at leaves." Jolene tapped the lower corner of the print, but that closure sign was only bent like that for a few weeks. A bear got into the post in late September. I replaced the sign the Monday after Lila disappeared. They found Edith's old walking notes in a kitchen drawer, bundled with rubber bands. Most were lists: Goldfinch, 2, feeder, bluebird box, empty, gatewalk, mushrooms bright as coins. One page was dated the same Saturday Lila vanished. Edith had written, in shaky pencil, "Took lane toward Warden Gate after lunch. Little deer near chain. 2 hikers arguing maybe no business of mine. Home before game." No one had interviewed Edith in 2019. She lived a mile from the west boundary. But the west boundary had not been part of the search. Rowan's map had pulled everyone east. That was the first real break in 5 years. It was also the beginning of a second investigation that felt, to everyone involved, like apologizing with tools. The photo had to be authenticated. Cal Rook described processing the film. Sylvie described finding the camera. Edith, now 86, and sharp only in flashes, remembered a deer and orange mushrooms. She did not remember faces. The disposable camera had been sold years earlier. Its date function could not be trusted. The film could not prove the year by itself. Anika needed the woods to testify. Jolene helped. The bent closure sign mattered. So did the mushrooms. The orange shelves at the stump were a flush of jack-o'-lantern fungus that appeared after a specific late September soaking and had been photographed by park volunteers in 2019 because it glowed under a black light. The stump had rotted away by 2022. In Edith's frame, it was whole. The Warden's Gate chain had been replaced in November 2019 with a heavier lock after a vandal cut it. Edith's picture showed the old chain and a distinctive missing link. Then there was the blue cap. Maris still had the duplicate. Lila had knitted 2 identical blue caps one winter, one for hiking and one because she had dropped the first in a grocery store and panicked before finding it under the apples. The hat in the photograph had the same uneven rib near the crown, visible when Annika enlarged the frame. That did not prove beyond all doubt, but it closed the space for coincidence. The pack cover was easier. Rowan had worn amber covers for years because he said orange looked like hunting season and yellow looked cheap. In old interviews from the search, he had stood under gray skies wearing the same amber cover. A red cord hung from his belt in the photograph. It matched the red cord on the old reserve access keys issued to certified guides before the program changed. Rowan had told investigators he did not carry his guide key that day because he and Lila had stayed on public trails. The photograph said otherwise. Annika did not go to Rowan first. She went back to Lila's room. Maris let her in without asking why, but when she saw the envelope in Anika's hand, her body changed. She did not reach for a chair. She reached for the doorframe. "You found something." "A photograph," Annika said. "We're still working through what it means." Theo arrived 10 minutes later, hair damp from leaving work in a hurry. Annika placed the enlarged print on Lila's map table. Nobody spoke for a long time. Maris looked at the blue cap. Theo looked at the man's shoulders. "That's Rowan," Theo said. "We believe it is." "Where is this?" "Warden's Gate." Maris closed her eyes. He said she hated that road. He said they didn't go there. Theo leaned closer, his face tightening not with shock, but with recognition. She did hate it. Not the road, the tours. She told me Rowan was taking clients through closed areas and calling them secret heritage routes. I told the detective back then she was upset with him. Annika looked up. "Which detective?" "The first one. Maybe Deputy Calder." "I don't remember. He wrote it down, I thought." It had been written down. Annika found it later in a supplementary interview, one sentence on page 46. Brother reports victim concerned about guide using restricted routes. No known connection to disappearance. The note had drowned under Dax Renner, the creek, the glove, the public terror of a woman lost in the dark. "What else did she tell you?" Annika asked. Theo stared at the map table. "She said Rowan was building something from her work." That sentence reopened Lila's life in a way the first investigation never had. In the weeks before she vanished, Lila had been preparing a submission to the State Conservation Office. Her laptop, boxed after the original search, contained draft letters, unsent because she had not found the courage or had not gathered enough proof. She described guided trespass on closed service roads, removed warning signs, and paid customers brought to sensitive plant sites under the promise of seeing places not on any map. She attached no photographs in the drafts. The folder path referenced an external drive that had never been found. Maris remembered the drive. It was green, rubber-cased, and usually hung from Lila's camera strap. It had vanished with the camera. Lila had also been angry about a guidebook. Rowan had announced a forthcoming project called Hidden Ways of Brackenfall, a glossy route collection built around forgotten roads and old charcoal tracks. The proposal praised his years of field research. In Lila's notes, saved in a file named Rowan Problem, she listed 32 route descriptions that appeared to be copied from her private trail cards. Beside one line she had typed, "He thinks because he remembers walking beside me, he owns what I saw." That did not make Rowan a killer. It made him a liar, or a thief, or a man careless with someone else's work. Annika needed the day itself. She returned to the first statement. Rowan said he and Lila left North Glass parking area at 12:20. Several hikers saw them near the Crow Glass kiosk at about 12:30. A volunteer trail counter picked up 2 passes at 12:42. After that, Rowan's version had stood alone. He said they took the eastern loop and reached Eelbrook Creek after 4. No one confirmed it. The terrain was too empty that time of year. Edith's photograph placed them at the Warden's Gate, western boundary, sometime when the sun was low, but not gone. Jolene and Annika spent 3 afternoons comparing shadows. The hemlock shadow in the picture crossed the service road at an angle consistent with approximately 4:35 to 4:55 on that October date. To get from Warden's Gate to Eelbrook Creek by Rowan's reported 5:10 separation would have required running hard over uneven ground. Lila had been strong, but the route made no sense. To get from the gate to the ranger station by 6:41, however, a person could drive down the closed service road, exit through the maintenance lane, and approach the public lot from the south. The old access road became the center. It did not give up answers easily. 5 years had changed the woods. Saplings crowded the ditches. The sap boiler shelter beyond Bracken Draw had collapsed completely, leaving a scatter of gray boards under moss. The old root cellar below it, once used to store syrup cans and tools, had sunk at one end. Warden's Line itself was a faint road cut, buried under leaves and blackberry canes. Search dogs brought in late could mark places, but not speak to time. A ground team found beer cans, a rusted shovel, a broken camera filter, 2 deer bones, and a green shoelace that turned out to belong to a volunteer's boot. The first real object came from under a flat stone beside the root cellar. It was not dramatic. It was a piece of plastic, clouded with dirt, the size of a coin. Jolene saw it because rain had washed one edge clean. The evidence technician photographed it before lifting it. The plastic had a white crescent printed on it. Maris identified it from a picture, part of the pull tab from Lila's green external drive. The search stopped being theoretical. Annika applied for a warrant on Rowan's house, business office, storage unit, and electronic records. The application was 71 pages long and built from the photograph, the Warden's Gate timeline, Lila's draft complaints, the missing camera drive, and inconsistencies in Rowan's access key statement. The judge signed it at 6:05 on a Friday evening. At 6:42, deputies entered Stone Cup Outdoor School, while a class of 8 adults sat in the downstairs room, learning how to pack for weather. Rowan was teaching. He looked at Annika, then at the uniformed deputies behind her, and did not ask what it was about. His office had changed since her first interview. The photograph of Lila was gone from the shelf. In its place were stacked copies of his guidebook, published the previous year. The map of the reserve still hung on the wall. Behind it, tucked into a narrow gap in the frame, an evidence technician found 3 old access tags on red cord. One tag matched the serial range issued to guides in 2019. Rowan had reported his missing in 2020. The storage unit held more. There were boxes of stone-cut brochures, client waivers, worn boots, damaged tents, and a locked plastic bin marked winter ropes. Inside the bin were route notebooks, laminated plant cards, and pages torn from Lila's old drafts. Not photocopies. Originals. Her handwriting ran along the margins, small and slanted, with arrows to plants and warnings about hidden pits. Some pages had Rowan's notes added beneath hers. Some had been cut apart. They found no body. They found no weapon. They found, in a zippered pouch, a strip of blue nylon consistent with the broken buckle on Lila's day pack, and a lens cloth embroidered with the initials L.M. Rowan said the materials had been given to him by Maris during the memorial sorting. Maris denied it. The interrogation began at 10:14 that night, in a room painted the color of old oatmeal. Rowan waved a lawyer at first. Men who have lived for years inside a successful story sometimes believe they can speak their way out of the first hour. He sat upright, hands folded, and listened while Annika placed the enlarged photograph on the table. For the first time since Jolene had seen him at the ranger station, Rowan looked genuinely caught off balance. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "Do you recognize the gate?" He stared at it too long. "It could be anywhere. It's Warden's Gate. I can see why you'd think that. Do you recognize the people?" The muscles near his mouth moved. "It's blurry. Is it you?" "I don't know." "Is it Lila?" He looked at Annika then, not angry, not grieving, but calculating how much grief the situation required. "I want to help you, but you're asking me to identify a smudge from 5 years ago." Annika said, "You told Ranger Pratt you never used your guide key that day." "I didn't." "You told investigators Lila disappeared near Eelbrook Creek around 5:10. "She did." "This photo places both of you at Warden's Gate within minutes of that time. If the date is right, it is. You can't know that. We know more than you think." That was an old line, and Annika disliked using it. But sometimes old lines worked because guilty people heard not the words, but the gap behind them. Rowan leaned back. "Lila and I went to a lot of places. If that picture is us, maybe it was another hike." "Then say that." "I'm saying maybe. Name the day." "I don't remember every hike." "You remembered every tree at Eelbrook." His eyes hardened for a fraction of a second. Then the softness returned. "Because that day destroyed my life." Annika let the sentence sit. It destroyed hers first. He asked for a lawyer after that. The second search at Warden's Line began at dawn 2 days later. This time, the team worked with the patience of people who understood that the woods had already beaten urgency once. They cut the area into squares. They marked old depressions. They brought in a cadaver dog named Mika, whose handler moved with slow, respectful concentration. Micah showed interest near the root cellar, but did not commit. She circled, whined, moved downslope, and returned to a patch of blackberry at the edge of Brackendraw. Under the blackberry was a narrow drainage cut lined with stones. Most of the stones had collapsed inward. At the top of the cut, hidden by roots, was a rusted metal door no larger than a cabinet panel. Jolene knew at once what it had been. SAP workers had used small cooling bays to store cans in the hill where the air stayed cold. The state map did not show this one. The old maintenance file mentioned 3 cooling bays, not 4. The door would not open. It had been wired shut from the outside, the wire rusted but intact beneath moss. When technicians cut it and pulled the panel free, the air that came out was cold and mineral, like a cellar sealed through seasons. They found Lila Merritt inside. There was no cinematic moment, no sudden cry from the hillside that made the truth clean. There were careful hands, white suits, evidence flags, and the terrible gentleness that falls over a search team when a missing person becomes present. Lila's remains lay in the narrow stone bay under a collapsed shelf. With her were fragments of blue fabric, the metal frame of her camera, the cracked green casing of the external drive, and a field notebook swollen into a block of softened paper. The camera had broken badly, but the memory card remained sealed behind the battery compartment, corroded and fragile. Maris did not go to the woods. Anika drove to her house after the recovery team confirmed identification through dental records. Theo was there. So was his wife, sitting on the sofa with both hands around a mug she did not drink from. Anika had delivered bad news before, but this was the kind that had lived in the room for 5 years and still struck like something new. "We found her," Anika said. Maris made a sound that was almost relief and almost refusal. Theo bent forward with his hands over his face. No one asked where at first. Where had mattered for 5 years, and then, suddenly, it was too small a word. The memory card became the next fragile witness. A state lab recovered only 8 files. 5 were corrupted beyond use. One showed a blurred close-up of bark. One showed the closed warden's gate from the inside, chain hanging loose. The last image was damaged at the edge, but clear enough in the center. Rowan's hand reaching toward the lens, palm open, face partly visible behind it, mouth formed around a word the photograph could not record. Behind him, on the old service road, lay Lila's blue rain shell. It still did not show what happened in the cooling bay, but it proved Lila's camera was in her hand after they entered the closed road. It proved Rowan had tried to stop her photographing. It proved his original story was not mistaken. It was built to move the world away from where Lila lay. Forensic work moved slowly. The medical examiner could not determine an exact cause of death, but fractures were consistent with a fall or impact before concealment. A small healed break in Lila's left wrist, known from childhood, confirmed identification alongside dental records. Trace analysis on the wire closing the cooling bay found corrosion, soil, and a partial pattern that meant little until investigators recovered wire cutters from Rowan's storage unit with old residue in the hinge. The comparison was cautious. It supported contact. It did not sing. The case became less about one perfect piece of evidence and more about a net. The forgotten photo had thrown the first line across the water. Everything after tightened it. Client records showed Rowan had led unauthorized lost road hikes through Warden's Line for cash payments marked as private instruction. Several clients remembered signing waivers that did not name the route. One remembered Rowan telling them the state exaggerated risks because maps are political. A former assistant named Petra Velez, who had left Stonecup after 3 months, said Rowan kept a green drive in his office safe for a while after Lila vanished. She remembered it because she had thought the rubber case looked like a frog. The safe was gone by the time of the warrant. Petra also remembered a phone call. She had not thought of it in years. 2 weeks before Lila disappeared, Rowan stood in the shop doorway, speaking quietly but furiously. Petra heard him say, "You don't get to make me a trespasser in my own woods." Then, after a long silence, "Without me, your little cards are just pretty weeds." Lila's friends filled in other pieces. She had been preparing to confront Rowan not only about copied work, but about the closed road tours. She believed he had removed 2 hazard signs near the sap boiler shelter because clients complained the signs ruined the feeling of discovery. If true, it meant he had turned a dangerous place into a selling point. Lila had photographed missing bolts on a signpost and fresh tire tracks at the gate. She had told one friend, He sells people the idea of being lost, then acts like a hero when he brings them back. Rowan's defense, once he had a lawyer, shifted from denial to contamination. The photo could be another date. The drive tab could have been carried by animals or water. Lila might have gone to Warden's line alone after separating from Rowan. Someone else might have sealed the cooling bay. Dax Renner knew the woods. Dax had root knives. Dax had lied before. Dax, by then, was 5 years older and thinner, working nights at a pallet yard 2 counties away. When Anika found him, he was sitting behind the yard office eating noodles from a plastic bowl. He listened to the update without expression. At the mention of Warden's Gate, he lowered the fork. "I told them," he said. "Told them what?" "I wasn't on that side. I had no reason to be. Ginseng's poor over there, too dry under those hemlocks. I told them if she was at the creek, maybe. But the West Road? That was Guide Boy country." "Guide Boy?" "That's what I called him. He hated it." Dax had never liked Rowan. That had made him easy to dismiss. He described seeing Rowan's dark green truck on the maintenance lane twice before the disappearance. Once with a woman in the passenger seat, whose blue cap he remembered because it was too bright against the leaves. He had not reported it in 2019 because nobody asked about the West Road, and because he knew how he sounded, a root thief accusing the town's favorite rescuer. "People like him don't steal from people like me," Dax said. "They steal the story first, then everything after sounds like mine." Anika did not use that line in the report, but she remembered it. The trial began the following April, when dogwoods opened pale along the courthouse lawn. By then, the cooling bay had been mapped, the photograph authenticated as far as science could take it, and Rowan's guidebook pulled quietly from 2 stores. The state charged him with second-degree murder, concealment of a body, obstruction, and evidence tampering. The murder charge rested on intent inferred from conflict, action, concealment, and the construction of a false disappearance. The defense argued accident, then argued uncertainty, then argued that the prosecution could not prove Rowan caused Lila's fatal injuries at all. Rowan came to court in a charcoal suit, clean-shaven, thinner than he had been in the magazine photographs. He did not look like a monster. That troubled some people, though it should not have. Most lies capable of lasting 5 years are built by ordinary-looking hands. Maris sat through every day. She brought no photograph of Lila. She wore Lila's blue cap folded in her lap, not on her head. Theo sat beside her with his shoulders squared, as if the courtroom were weather. Jolene testified first about the night Rowan came to the station. The defense asked whether he appeared genuinely distressed. Jolene said yes. "Could a genuinely distressed person still be lying?" the prosecutor asked on redirect. Jolene looked at Rowan only once. "Yes." Cal Rook testified about developing the film. Sylvie testified about finding the camera. Edith Barlow could not appear in person, so the jury saw a recorded deposition taken in her niece's living room. Edith sat in a floral chair, small and bird-boned, a quilt over her knees. She did not remember Lila's name. She remembered the deer. She remembered 2 hikers at the gate. "They were cross with each other," Edith said on the recording. "How could you tell? Their bodies. You can tell when people are making the trees listen." No one smiled. The line hung in the courtroom with the odd force of accidental truth. The state's image analyst enlarged the photograph until the grain became a landscape of its own. She did not pretend it was sharper than it was. She identified the gate, the old chain, the bent sign, the position of the sun, the blue rain shell on Rowan's pack. She compared the shape of his pack to images from the original search and Stone Cup promotional materials. She compared the red access cord. She stopped short of saying the photo alone proved identity beyond doubt. Good experts leave the last inch to the jury. Then came Lila's recovered photograph from the memory card. Rowan's hand reaching for the lens, the blue shell on the road, the closed world of Warden's line visible behind him. Maris made no sound when it appeared on the screen. Theo did. A single exhale, sharp as a cut. The defense tried to make the photograph mean less. Perhaps Rowan had been reaching to help with the camera. Perhaps Lila had dropped the shell. Perhaps the argument was about trespassing, not danger. Perhaps she later walked away. But arguments that might work in separate rooms began failing when placed together. Rowan said Eelbrook. The picture said Warden's Gate. Rowan said Lila carried the blue shell. Edith's photo said it was on his pack. Rowan said he had no key. The red cord said otherwise. Rowan said the camera vanished in the eastern woods. The camera died in a sealed cooling bay on the West Road. Petra Vallis testified reluctantly. She did not want her name in articles. She described the green drive in Rowan's safe and the angry phone call. Rowan watched her with a disappointment that looked practiced, as if he had expected better loyalty from everyone he had frightened. Dax Renner testified in a clean shirt too large at the collar. The prosecutor kept him on facts. Where did ginseng grow? Why would he be near Eelbrook and not Warden's line? Had he threatened Lila? Yes, once, with words he regretted. Had he hurt her? No. Had Rowan ever spoken to him after she vanished? Dax glanced toward the defense table. He came to my sister's place, Dax said. 3 days after. Told me I ought to tell the truth before my lies made it worse. What did you take that to mean? That he needed me to be scared. The defense attacked his record, his illegal digging, his drinking, his memory. Dax endured it with a weary stillness. When asked why he had not helped search more actively, he said, "Because every time I walked toward those people, they looked relieved to hate me. I wasn't going to give them a better view." By the 7th day, Rowan's original grief had become evidence against him, not because grief proved guilt, but because he had used it to place everyone in the wrong forest. The jury heard his 2019 interviews. They watched him point to the map. They heard him say he would give anything to have kept Lila closer. Then they saw Edith's photograph again, the two figures beneath the hemlocks, standing on a road he had erased from the story. Rowan did not testify. The verdict took 9 hours. Guilty on concealment, obstruction, and evidence tampering. Guilty on second-degree murder. When the clerk read the final count, Maris lowered her head over the blue cap. She did not cry in the way reporters expected. The crying had been spent in kitchens, in parked cars, on the edge of sleep, in the 5 years when the world kept asking her to accept a creek that had never held her daughter. In court, she only pressed the cap to her mouth and closed her eyes. At sentencing, Rowan spoke. He did not confess cleanly. People wanted the whole truth to arrive at the end, because stories had trained them to expect that. Rowan gave them a smaller, uglier thing. He said Lila had misunderstood. He said the closed road tours were harmless. He said she had threatened to ruin work that helped people love the forest. He said they argued at Warden's line, and she grabbed for his pack because she believed her drive was inside it. He said she slipped near the old shelter. He said she was breathing when he climbed down, then not. He said he panicked. Annika watched him as he spoke. There were places where his voice flattened, not from grief, but from editing. He never explained the wire on the cooling bay. He never explained taking her camera. He never explained walking into the ranger station with a map to Eelbrook Creek already arranged inside him. Marius did not ask him to. Her statement was brief. She stood with one hand on the lectern and the other resting over Lila's blue cap. "You told me the woods took her," she said. "For 5 years I tried to forgive the woods. I tried to stand under trees and not hate them. But the woods did not come to my door. The woods did not draw an X on a map. The woods did not carry her jacket on its back. You did." She sat down before the judge could offer water. Rowan received 29 years. The number sounded both large and insufficient. as all numbers do beside a life. The summer after the trial, the state removed the memorial marker from Eelbrook Creek. It had been carved by volunteers, a small cedar plaque with Lila's name, and the words "last seen near here." Jolene unscrewed it herself. For a moment, she stood with the plaque in her hands and looked at the fern bed where 5 years of flowers, ribbons, and notes had been left for a woman who had never vanished there. The new marker was not placed at the cooling bay. Maris did not want people hiking to the exact spot, turning it into a destination or a dare. Instead, it was set near the public education garden at the ranger station, beside a bed of moonwort fern propagated from legal stock. The wording was simple: Lila Merritt, map maker, teacher, daughter, sister. She taught people to see where they were. Dax Renner did not attend the dedication, but he sent a small envelope with no return address. Inside was a pressed ginseng leaf and a note in block letters. "I am sorry I was an easy lie." Maris kept the note in Lila's workroom, not because it comforted her, but because it belonged to the truth. The room changed after that. Theo helped her pack the duplicates and the things that had become painful only because they were waiting. They donated Lila's teaching maps to the county school program. They gave her plant slides to the ranger station. Maris kept the map table, the blue cap, and one trail card Lila had never finished. It showed a small drawing of a hemlock cone and a blank space where the warning text should have been. Annika visited once, months later, to return copies of documents Maris had requested. The workroom windows were open. Dust moved in the light. Outside, Theo's little boy ran in the yard with a stick, shouting at a dog that ignored him. Maris placed Edith Barlow's photograph on the map table. Not the enlarged courtroom print, but a small copy, close to the original size. At that scale, the truth was almost invisible unless you knew how to look. 2 figures at a gate, a patch of blue, a road no one had searched. "I hated it at first," Maris said. "It felt cruel that she was so small in it." Annika said nothing. "Now, I think that's how the truth usually is," Maris continued. "Not hidden because it's clever. Hidden because everyone is looking somewhere else." Edith Barlow died the next winter. At her memorial, Sylvie told the story of the camera in the knitting basket, the deer, the orange mushrooms, the photograph that waited 5 years to become important. People called it luck. Jolene called it a witness with bad timing. Annika called it the evidence. Maris, when asked, said only that Lila had spent her life taking pictures so people would notice what they were standing beside. In the end, someone else's forgotten picture had done the same for her. The warden's gate stayed closed. The state replaced the chain, posted a plain warning, and removed Stonecup's old guide access from every permit list. Rowan's guidebooks disappeared from visitor center shelves, but a few remained in garages and thrift stores, their pages full of routes he had named as if naming were the same as knowing. On some copies, people crossed out his notes and wrote Lila's name in the margins. 5 years is long enough for a lie to grow roots. It becomes part of directions people give each other. Take the trail where Lila disappeared. Stay away from Eelbrook after dark. Watch for men like Dax Renner. Trust Rowan. He knows these woods. The photograph did not uproot the lie all at once. It loosened the soil. It made one old map look wrong. It made one grieving mother ask why the blue shell was on the wrong back. It made a ranger remember a bent sign, a detective reopen a boxed file, a former assistant admit what she had heard through a shop doorway, a route thief say the thing nobody had wanted from him because nobody had wanted him at all. And it led them back to Lila, not to the version of her frozen on posters, smiling under the word missing. Not to the rumor of a careless woman stepping from a trail for one last photograph. Back to the real Lila, who had noticed stolen routes, missing warning signs, and the arrogance of a man who believed the forest belonged to his voice because he knew how to describe it. Back to the woman who raised a camera when the story began to turn dangerous. Back to the daughter Mary's had been trying to find in every blue scrap of color under every wet tree. In the last photograph Lila took, Rowan's hand fills half the frame. It is open, almost gentle, reaching for the lens. Behind it, the old road narrows into green dark. For years, people thought the important thing about that day was the place where Lila stepped away. The truth was that she had not stepped away at all. She had been led through a locked gate by someone she trusted, into a part of the woods he thought no one would remember. He counted on distance, on reputation, on a false map, on the public's hunger for a simple danger with a familiar face. He counted on the forest swallowing the rest. He did not count on an old woman photographing a deer. He did not count on a disposable camera waiting in a knitting basket. He did not count on the small blue shape on his pack, the bent sign behind him, the road opening like a witness over his shoulder. That was how the case changed, not with a confession, not with a dramatic call, with a forgotten picture, poorly framed and nearly thrown away, holding just enough of the world in place to prove where the lie began.